Hey everyone, I'm Jim Cook, Market Relationship Manager with Bergen KDV and 2021-22 President of Cedar Rapids Downtown Rotary Service Club. I'm excited to welcome you to our new podcast series called Rotary Roundtable, which we created to tell our club story in a new and different way. In this episode, we're putting the international in Rotary International and looking at how Rotary builds friendships on a global scale. We'll talk with Rotarians Jack Evans, Lee Clancey, Bob Kazimour, and Joe Lock about some of our club's international projects and the lifelong connections they've made over the years as part of Downtown Rotary. Our conversation is moderated by Downtown Rotarian board member Adam Moore. We hope this podcast expands your view of what Rotary is and how we can affect change on a global scale. Enjoy.
Hey, thanks everybody for joining us today. We're so excited to have you for this discussion about international service and international connections. I want to start with just introductions. Jack, maybe you kick us off.
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here today. My name is Jack Evans. I think I celebrated my 39th year in Rotary this past year, and I was president of the organization in 1989.
Great. Joe.
Thanks, Adam. I'm Joe Lock. I'm the International Service Committee Chair for Rotary and have been for the last 5 years. And I am the President-elect of the CR Downtown Rotary Club.
Great. Lee?
Thanks, Adam. I'm Lee Clancey, and I, too, have been in Rotary quite a while. I've also been president of Rotary, gone to the international conference, and also have chaired one of the international projects.
Great.
Wow.
I'm Bob Kazimour. I've been in Rotary for 41 years. I've never been president. I have been chairman of the Committee on International Relations in 1990 and 92, I believe it was.
Okay, great. Well, we have so much insight and experience here. I love this. I wanted to open it up a little bit. I think as being a member of the club myself for only about 5 years, I've already heard some incredible international stories, and I know, Jack, you've got a couple that I've heard a few times, but I'd love to have you share with our readers just about your experiences, visiting overseas. What's that like to go, to another Rotary?
Well, it's been very special. I've had two occasions I'd like to highlight. One, we were in Prague and found where Rotary was meeting and went to the restaurant and went in, and there wasn't a soul in the room, and realized that I had an old directory and they had moved. But this gentleman came up to me and he pointed at my Rotary pin, and then he looked me right in the eye and he gave me hand signals, because neither one of us understood each other's language, on where Rotary's being, 2 blocks this way and 1 block this way. So that's where I went and had a delightful meeting of that Rotary Club. My highlight, however, though, was I was on an economic development trip to Russia. This was in the late 80s. That sounds like a contradiction in terms, an economic development trip to Russia, but attended, and it was in Siberia, believe it or not. It was with a group of academics that had come over here, and I had met with them as part of Priority 1, so they invited us to go back. Well, really nobody wanted to go, but I talked to my wife and decided that this could be fun. So there was a group of 5 of us that went. The experience in Siberia was difficult because it is a third world country. But on the way back, we stopped in Moscow to catch a flight back to the U.S. And Bill Munsell, who was an executive for a broadcast or for an advertising company here in town, had been dispatched there to set up their operation in Moscow. So I looked him up, and we set this up before, and he said, fine, we'll go out for dinner. And Moscow had just established a Rotary Club.
Oh.
So we met in his office. He'd arranged a driver. We drove in a pounding rainstorm to this restaurant and walked in to a Rotary Club of 35 members. I had a big advantage because my wife's father was the president of Russell Hampton, which is the supplier of all things Rotary in terms of ties and jackets and hats. And he had sent me dated inventory that I had hauled to Siberia and brought back with me. So I was prepared for this group. But we went in, we were welcomed. the dinner was $20, and they wanted a $20 bill.
Greenback.
They wanted green stuff. So paid, had a delightful meal, and it came time for the speaker. And the speaker was a gentleman that had studied religious history and buildings in Moscow and gave the talk that was translated into English by a very eloquent young lady who Bill Munsell, after the meeting was over, went and hired her to be his personal translator. So a connection of Rotary.
Yeah, perfect.
But he gave this talk. She translated. It was interesting. But during the talk, and I should interject here that there were 35 members in the club, but there were 11 different countries represented in the room because they were a new club. And so, but during the talk, I kept hearing this undercurrent behind me. And talking, and I thought, boy, that's really kind of rude. Well, then I listened a bit, and it was a gentleman from the club who was translating the Russian into French because the gentleman sitting next to him was from France. And I thought to myself, this is really Rotary International. Yeah. And it was a delightful evening. I'd said something to the president of the club that I had all these gifts. And anyway, after the speaker, he called me up and said that I was from the U.S. And then I handed out all these gifts. Well, you'd have thought I was Santa Claus at Christmas, but tie pins, that were 4 inches wide. My father-in-law couldn't get rid of these, so for me to give them away was a real treat. But Rotary is international, and it was a very moving experience for me, and to be in the country of Russia, and to do this. And this was their first club. It had been written up in the Rotarian magazine. That's why I suggested to. And Bill Munsell thoroughly enjoyed it and found himself a translator and took me back to the hotel, and I came home. So it was a treat.
I mean, I think it's great to hear the kind of Rotary camaraderie on an international level. I mean, can you talk a little bit about? I mean, you're an American coming to Moscow.
Yeah.
I don't know about Russian. I need to study my history, perhaps. I'm not sure what our relations were at the time, but I mean, what was kind of the environment for you?
Well, it's ironic that, I just tell you that story with what's happened over the last 3 months.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it wasn't that way in the room.
Yeah.
In the room, I felt welcomed. It was very warm. People introduced themselves, and not all of them spoke English, but some of them did. Yeah. So we could have a conversation at dinner. And the fact that there were 11 other countries represented in the room, I think was sort of emblematic of what really Rotary is.
It's like a UN meeting on a certain level with all the translation going
sort
on.
Sort of a UN session, but we need Jim Leach here, who's a Russian scholar, to explain
Yes.
what was going on that year, and if there was détente or rapprochement or whatever the word is over there. But
has anybody else been involved with the kind of Rotary clubs in other countries, or just your experience? Has anybody attended other international sessions?
Just to tag on to Jack on the Russians, that was during the Glasnost Perestroika era, just the start of it, which translated basically was Russia's term of trying to become free or freer.
Open to the...
A little open. They weren't very open. But that was the start of it right about that time, and the Russian citizenry, the people were so excited about it. And Vlasta, or Patricia, your translator that Bill hired, was the young lady that later helped us with the Just for Julia. Yeah. And she was so capable. And if I didn't know better, I would have thought she probably was KGB, because she just seemed to be able to get anything accomplished that you needed. And the building, that Bill lived in was basically an American, quote, building. And they had a grocery store in it, and they had a dry goods store and a little clothing store. They had everything in that building. And they were very cautious or very careful when they'd go outside, which I'm sure you found, Jack.
Bob, I think just speaking of the Just for Julia kind of project, I'd love to have you talk about that because that's such a big piece of our club's kind of international history or activities.
Okay, well, thank you. I was chairman of the international projects at that time, and we didn't have one. And actually, I had no thought of finding one in Russia. Jan, my wife, was chair of the Cedar Rapids Community School Foundation at the time. And Tom Ecker, who was a Rotarian and former president of both our club and the new West Side Club, was with the school board. And they put together a tour to Russia. And Jan was also on the Mercy Medical Center Foundation board, or the foundation, but also the trustees. And Jim Tinker, who was a Rotarian, and I think he was 93 as president, I believe. But he and Jan, they talked to Tom Ecker, and Jim volunteered all of these supplies and things, medical supplies that we could handle, and we had a group of us that went over. And it all started out where Jan and David Hupt, a physician here in Cedar Rapids, an anesthesiologist, were invited to this hospital where they made all these donations of needles and single-use hypodermic needles. Okay. And they were told very quickly, oh no, they will be used many, many times, because they had none. They didn't have anything. Mm-hmm. And this hospital, which was supposed to be the cream of the crop hospital in Stavropol, we walked in, and it was in July, and it was about 90 degrees. The operating suite was in this old hospital building. All the windows were wide open, no screens, lace curtains, cracked linoleum floor, and an operating table. Wow. And they were going to do open heart surgery in the next half hour. So both David and Jan were invited to sit in, and they both deferred because they knew they were going to see someone's life terminated. And fortunately, the doctors were very good and made it through. But that was televised by Russian TV, and it was put on the news that afternoon. And when we arrived back at our hotel, this young lady and her little daughter, who was 10 at the time, were sitting on the front steps waiting for us. And it was Julia Sakharova, the little 10-year-old girl who was a child prodigy violinist, and her mother, Marina, who was a concert pianist, a touring concert pianist. And she wanted us to hear Julia perform, which we did, and she was very good. She said, I want you to take her back with you to the United States, because they wouldn't do that surgery in Russia because it wasn't, quote, life-threatening. And we said, well, we'll see what we can do.
And I'm sorry, Bob, what was...
She had a severe cleft palate, no roof in her mouth, no roof of the mouth at all. She had to wear a steel plate to eat and drink and things so that she could swallow. Mm-hmm. And so we came back to the United States, and we stopped at Bill Munsel's in Moscow, which Vlasta was she picked us up at the airport and took us up to Bill's building, and they were very, very helpful, and we used them as a interface with Russia, because you really didn't have any other way to talk on telephones or it just wasn't available. Mm-hmm. So it took about 9 months to finally arrange to get them here. Julie Hender, one of our club members, owned Destinations Unlimited. She stepped up and supplied 2 round-trip tickets from Moscow to O'Hare in Chicago. Vinny Nose, president in 62, I believe, or 1964. We flew in his plane and picked them up at O'Hare, and they were just thrilled because they thought everybody in the United States traveled this way, with Vinny's jet. And so they were well received. And I went down to the university hospitals before that and met with John Colleton, who was a good friend through the old Chamber of Commerce in Iowa City, and asked John if they could supply the needed surgery and all that sort of thing. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the University of Iowa hospitals were ranked number 2 in the nation in this particular surgery. Okay. So we just lucked out and really had experts doing it. And he said, Bob, I'd be happy to do it, but it's going to take a lot of time because I got to go through the Board of Regents to get approval and all this sort of thing. And so Terry Branstad was our governor at the time, and his secretary. I had worked with them quite a bit through the Iowa Motor Carriers group, and I called her and told her what I needed, and about 10 minutes later, we got a fax letter signed by Governor Branstad approving it. And John said, Bob, you don't realize I worked 3 to 4 years on a project just to get money. And he said, here, we got it in 10 minutes. So it worked well, and they did a beautiful job, both on the surgery and the dental work and all those kinds of things. And brought her back, and they stayed here for about almost 3 months. And we arranged housing and that sort of thing, sort of took turns with that. And then they went back to Russia, and times changed then in the next few years in Russia. They spent time in these one of these large condo apartment Russian concrete buildings and what have you, where there would be families, like 4 or 5 families in a unit, and a lot of drug addiction. And little Julia would walk out in the morning, there'd be a dead body in the hallway of somebody that overdosed. And it was really traumatic. Yeah. And they contacted us again later, and we had the Just for Julia Rotary project as our international project. Our downtown Rotarians did, and supported the financial. We raised money and that sort of thing, and churches and other people chimed in. And so then Julia decided she wanted to come to the United States, and she did, and she enrolled in Oberlin. She got a scholarship in the Oberlin Musical Conservatory, graduated in 4 years in all the courses in English, written and spoken, and graduated with honors, and then toured as a performer just within that area, and then got a full ride scholarship to Juilliard, and which was really good. But any time that your kids or somebody, your name is a 2-syllable word like Dad or Bob, you know it's going to cost you money. And she called Marina, our mother. She said, everything is paid for except room and board. They had to find their own room and board outside of Juilliard, because Juilliard is a school, doesn't have any dormitories. They're right down in New York City. Mm-hmm. But it's $10,000 a semester. So we had to come up with that. And she finished the year, graduated with honors, and today is married and lives in St. Louis, is on the staff of the University of Missouri, and still tours worldwide as an artist with a Missouri contingency of a quartet. She has performed with the Orchestra Iowa with Tim Hankowicz and so forth. So
also a member of Downtown.
Also
Rotary.
a member of Downtown, yeah. And she has come up, visited us twice in this last year with Jan, my wife, that has some medical issues, and she's come up to visit her.
That's such an enduring, great story.
It is.
About
It's been, and she's 43 years old now.
Wow.
So that tells you how fast time goes.
Can you talk a little bit about how Downtown Rotary kind of engaged? You're talking about the Just for Julia project. I know we're raising money. You know, what did the membership? What was the buy-in like? What were people passionate about?
It was amazing. Everybody really was interested in it. I think Jack, it was right after Jack's presidency, and Jack, you can probably speak to that better than I can, just knowing how it worked out. I think Gary Peterson was president the year we brought Julia back, but I know you were still involved because Gary and then Mike Donahue followed you, as I recall.
That's right.
And then I think Gary was there when Julia, and then Vinnie Nose, and then Tom Feld, all good friends, and everybody just gathered around, and we raised funds, and everybody contacted churches and other groups that really stepped up, and whatever we needed, people seemed to step up and donate to them. So it was really a Rotary should be very, very proud of how they affected someone's life so dramatically.
Yeah.
And everybody else, because a lot of people have really enjoyed her music.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a beautiful story. I thought I heard Jim getting up to leave, so I was just going to give him a... Lee, I wanted to just talking about impacting people's lives. I know I'd love to have you talk about A Promise of Health, because I know that was such a great project, an important project. Again, for Downtown Rotary, I'd love to just have you kind of tell that story of how we got involved and your role in that.
Promise of Health was an initiative that came to us from outside of Rotary.
Okay.
It was first envisioned by a couple named Barb and Bill Grinnell, who are actually not even from Cedar Rapids, but they had friends here, Mary and Carl Carson, and the Carsons were the ones that brought it to Rotary as an idea for us to participate in. The whole concept revolved around the fact that in the entire Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico, thousands and thousands of Mayan lived in very, very poor conditions without any access to health care whatsoever. And they envisioned a project that would take health care to the pueblos or villages of the Yucatan with a portable mobile clinic. And they asked if we would be involved with not only getting this clinic put together, but also getting it actually to Mexico, and then raising some money to hire doctors. And we decided, Rotary decided that sounded like it would be a really interesting and helpful project to be involved with. So we ended up getting an old RV donated that was completely outfitted as a mobile clinic.
Okay.
And it was then sent down to the Port of New Orleans, and in it it was completely outfitted with every piece of equipment that was necessary for a doctor to perform just regular checkups with people. And we also decided that we would fill these cloth bags with all sorts of school supplies, and we had 500 of them that we were going to give to the children in the Yucatan when we got there, because there was a delegation that was going down to present the RV mobile clinic to the.
A delegation from our club, or
yes, a delegation from our club and the Grinnells and the Carsons, and so that there were about 10 of us that went down. We had planned to have this RV driven from, I'm trying to think of what the port was in north of Merida, but we all met in Merida, and we ended up going to the Rotary Club in Merida and talking to Rotary about the Rotary Club of Merida about having them participate in this project as well. And it was a fascinating experience to go down there, because unless you get out of your own comfort zone and understand how poor people live, and the fact that they literally had no access to health care or really even healthy food, it was extraordinary. So we all got down to Merida, and the government in Mexico, the Port Authority, would not release the RV from the port. They wanted a fee. And we refused to pay the fee because everything had been donated. And we kept saying, we're volunteers, this is a donation, it's going to help all these people, thousands and thousands of Mayan. Nope, they wouldn't release it. They didn't release that RV for 5 months. So all of these bags of school supplies and equipment and everything were just sitting in the port for 5 months. I had brought down a couple of extra bags, and so we had them as an example of what was going to be coming. But it was so disappointing not to be able to be there when the RV arrived. There were 2 other prongs of this project. Not only was it to deliver healthcare, but it was also to talk about hygiene and cleanliness and healthy and nutritious food. And we had seed packets at all the schools. They were going to start planting community gardens, showing the children how to plant healthy food so that they could go back and plant gardens at their homes. It was a pretty extraordinary project, and it went on for, I think, about 3 or 4 years. We provided financial assistance to the doctors. The RV was used, when it finally arrived, it was used to go out to all these pueblos, and it over very awful roads.
Sure.
The streets and roads were, all dirt. And the RV finally gave up the ghost after about 3 years. So then they decided that they would have the doctors live in a pueblo, and they would have what they called medicine wheels, where each doctor was responsible for 8 to 10 pueblos around the central pueblo. And the doctor would then go out and meet with people and provide health care. And that went on for quite a long time, until they just couldn't get doctors to volunteer their time to do it, or because we just didn't have the money for it. And right now, they've continued on with the project, but it's taken a completely different form. They have gone farther down south in the Yucatan, and they have a female doctor right now, and they have built a clinic that is just now getting finished. The interior doors are just being put on, and it's a clinic where she and her 2 children will live, and they will provide health care to as many people as can make it into the clinic as possible. And the Grinnells are still raising money to try to fund this doctor, and they've raised money to fund the building of this clinic. So it has been a very worthwhile project. It has touched the lives of thousands, literally thousands of people in the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. So it was a very. I went down twice, and my son, who is a director out in California, he put together a video that was in Spanish and in Mayan with subtitles that told the story of the Mayan people and also the story of Promise of Health. And it was about a 7 or 8 minute video, and it was used for a long time to help raise money for the project.
That's incredible that it's set up such a legacy that it continues today.
It's continued today.
Yeah. Leah, if I could use that to springboard to Joe, because I think it's interesting hearing some of those challenges and the hiccups that happen and some of that stuff in international service, right? I've had the privilege of serving with Joe on the board and hearing about some of the international projects that you've worked on and some of the, I don't want to say headaches because I know it's worthwhile, but just some of the challenges. I'm wondering if you could maybe tell us about some stuff that's going on and just talk through what it's like to organize and try to push this stuff forward when we're thousands of miles away. I think it's so interesting.
Well, sometimes it really is a challenge, Adam. So the very first project, international project that I worked on is actually still going on.
Okay.
And we're not finished yet. And so we called it Water for Life in Haiti, in a small community with about 30,000 people. And the idea is that they don't have clean drinking water, they don't have latrines, they can't wash their hands. And because there have been multiple projects over the years in Haiti by Rotary clubs around the world that failed, Rotary International, which So this gets down to the intricacies of making a global grant work.
Sure.
We're really tough to make sure that we wouldn't fail. And it's still going on because this is back in in 2017.
Okay.
We started the project, and after 584 geological and hydrological wells that were, in other words, core samples being done. What happened was multiple times that there were projects that were done and they would put wells in and the water would be not suitable to drink, typically because it's either too dirty and there wasn't proper filtration, or more apt to happen would be that too much saline, it was too salty to drink. And so we started by drilling all of these core samples and small wells, and then the government was overthrown, and then the Minister of Culture was killed, and then was the coronavirus. And so, there was a level 4 travel advisory. You couldn't go back and forth. And so just within the last couple of months, so this is 5 years old at this point, things started to kick in again. And so one of the great things about the International Service Committee of Downtown Rotary is that I have 3 past presidents on my committee of 15 that are able to help steer, and they know people, and they've been there and done that to help us succeed. And so while that one certainly it was a rough one to start with, we've actually completed 3 more in the years subsequent to that, and also currently have one that we're getting ready to start as well. So one of the great things, too, about Cedar Rapids Downtown Rotary is that, we're in the top 25 largest clubs in America. We're the largest one in Iowa, and in the top 35 in the world in terms of membership. And so the way I see the International Service Committee, that the work that the Cedar Rapids Downtown Rotary does, is it's really a privilege that we have the budget, frankly, and the membership that is willing to be so philanthropic and contribute to these projects, because we're literally changing the lives of people not only all around the world, 1 year at a time, but also a couple of years ago here in Northeast Iowa. So we're District 5970 in the Northeast part of Iowa. And so a couple of years ago, we had a district governor, Michelle Bell, and her project. She said, I want to bring international funds to here to Eastern Iowa. And so in order to make this happen, you have to have an international club sponsor.
Okay.
And so we found a sponsor in India who was able to make this happen and made a contribution to this. And what they did was provide medical and dental supplies, equipment specifically, to federally qualified health centers in Eastern Iowa, in Cedar Rapids and Waterloo and Dubuque and Mason City. Wow. And so things like dental chairs and vaccination freezers and ultrasounds for pregnant women. And so we really based this. There are 6 pillars of Rotary, and one of the 6 pillars is maternal and child health. And so we wrote the grant around that, and it was successful. It was almost exactly $200,000, and the equipment is still in use today. So that was 3 years ago, and it's very impactful.
That's cool to see the connections go back and forth.
It is really unusual, and it was something that Michelle was very proud of, and I'm proud of her too for thinking of it, to try to bring international dollars here, because you think, well, gosh, we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Why would we want to do that? But it's because people, by and large, don't realize the amount of poverty that exists right here in our own community and in Northeast Iowa.
I'd love to open it up just a little bit and talk about the legacy of international service with our club. I know that's been a big piece of our history. Is that, just from a leadership standpoint, why has that been so important for Downtown Rotary? Why do you feel passionate about that?
I think I feel passionate about it because it really does provide an opening into a different part of the world than what we experience. I was listening to everybody talk, and I think one of the more challenging things about international projects is that they have a time limit. They really only last for anywhere from 1 to 4 years, and then they're done. And it's very hard to try to get a project to the point where it is self-sufficient, or they're able to raise money to keep going. And I think that's a challenge that we all have to deal with when we think about these projects. The water project, it's interesting. There are lots and lots of Rotaries across this country and in other countries that do water projects in Africa and India, third world countries primarily. A lot of water projects, and those can, although yours is taking 5 years, most of the time they can go in, drill a well, get the water going, and then you're out again. It's a very short-term project. But when you think about the project that we did with Promise of Health, that one was a difficult one to let go, because it really left them kind of struggling for many years in terms of how to pay doctors, how to pay for supplies, how to keep providing health care.
Joe, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit, obviously without maybe getting in the weeds. I don't want to get you in trouble with RI or anything, but talk about some of the challenges of or what it takes to push some of these big projects forward. You're talking about sponsors we need. Obviously, there's a funding piece, applications, I'm sure. Just talk a little bit about what that is like, trying to get something like this off the ground.
Well, first of all, you have to have an international sponsor. And a lot of times that happens, as Lee talked about going to the Rotary International Convention. I'm getting ready to go to the International Convention in Houston, so not as exciting as probably where you went, Lee. But it's going to be literally in 3 weeks. And so that's going to be an opportunity to interact with people from all over the world. They're expecting 20,000 attendees from all over the world. And so, and that's how Michelle, for example, was able to connect with this group in India. But you're right. I mean, the first and foremost component is you've got to have a sponsor, and they've got to have some money. And so, a realistic initial sponsor could be $5,000 to $10,000.
Okay.
And so, for example, this year and for the next 2 years subsequent to this, we're initiating in Malindi, Kenya, Africa, a literacy and numeracy and microloan program for 800 families. Wow. And so the first year is going to be teaching people literacy so that they understand commerce and how to work with that. And then they will be taught numeracy and how to financially transact and make sure that they're not being swindled, and that they understand how to begin rudimentary banking. Mm-hmm. And then the third year will finally be doing microloans within their own clubs. And when I say microloans, it may be 50 cents to buy a farm animal, similar to like the Heifer Project, but on a really individual basis. So a family trying to learn to raise chickens or have goat milk, that kind of thing. And so, but you're right, the funding piece is critical. It's also very typical that we will have anywhere from 15 to 30 sponsors. Some of those, most of those typically are other clubs. So for this project right now, so the Cedar Rapids Downtown Rotary had the seed money this year and made a pledge for the next 2 years of $5,000 for each one of those years to be the in-country sponsor. We have a club in Virginia, we have a club in California, we have a club in Canada that have already pledged, although we're not quite there yet to actually write the check. But that gets that started, and there's the potential for a district match, so a District 5970 match, as well as the Rotary International World Fund match there too. And so you've got to have the money, and then you've got to have a needs assessment. And I remember the very first time I attended a grant workshop 30 years ago on how to write a grant, and the speaker came up and she said this. She said, if you take nothing from this grant writing workshop today, but this, it's the most important. And she said, there are 3 things you have to remember. Make it compelling, make it compelling.
Sure.
And so that's really true. I mean, you have to be able to not only these days, not just write a great grant, but back it up with data and show a needs assessment that you know that this will be enduring and will genuinely make a positive impact in the lives of people.
I think, and so you're saying some of these projects that have 15, 30 sponsors, is a lot of that happening from the conventions? Is there other ways that you're making those connections?
It happens through that. It also happens through, like I said, the 6 pillars of Rotary. There are Rotary action groups,
yes.
and so, for example, we did two projects in teaching a non-surgical method to correct clubfoot. One in Venezuela and one in Argentina.
Okay.
And the first one we did, it was almost $200,000 that we raised through all these different clubs and funding mechanisms in order to train 28 orthopedic surgeons in country. And so the Ponseti method was created by Dr. Ponseti down at the University of Iowa back in the 50s and 60s. And it was really, he had a lot of criticism about it because it was non-surgical. And I was very fortunate to be able to spend a half a day down there a few years ago and see Dr. Jose Morquende, who is Dr. Ponseti has passed, and he is now the head of that project. And he personally goes all around the world and trains orthopedic surgeons to do this. And the way they do it is, if a child is born with a clubfoot, which means that their feet are typically 90 degrees from where they should be, over the course of 5 to 7 weeks, they literally take a plaster cast that costs less than $5, and they gently stretch that foot and the ligaments there, and they recast it, and they have the kiddo come back the next week, and they stretch it a little farther, and cast it again, and do that again for, like I said, 5 to 7 weeks, and that's it. It's amazing.
You know, when you talk about Rotary International and going to the international meetings, that's where you learn a lot of these things. It's extraordinary what Rotary clubs across the world do for other people, both in their communities, in their countries, and in other countries. It really, it was one of the best learning experiences that I'd ever had, and seeing and experiencing what all these other clubs do all over the world.
I got to go to Seoul, South Korea with Nance, and they had to have 2 plenary sessions because they couldn't get everyone in the room at the same time. I think our number was more like 50,000.
Oh, my.
I mean, it was in Asia, and it was very popular back then, but it was just a huge job. But Lee is right. What you pick up at those sessions is pretty interesting. I went to the president-elect's luncheon and sat down, and the gentleman sat down beside me, and I introduced myself, and he introduced himself, and he was from Des Moines. And his name was Jay Tone. I'll never forget. I said,
you're
Jay,
kidding. Jay Tone?
What do you do that's unique in your
well.
club? And he said, well, twice a year we meet, as Paul Harris did, in businesses' locations. And we used to do that here. We haven't done it for a while, I think. But that was very interesting. We came back. That was my idea that I brought back, and we did it for years. And different companies would host, and they'd tell about what they did, and that's the way we started. In Chicago. But
And when I went, I was talking to somebody. I can't even remember where they were from. Someplace in the United States, but not in Iowa. And they said how important it was that everybody in our clubs understand the history of Rotary,
Right.
and I introduced in my year Rotary Moment, so that it would be somebody would get up and give a 1-minute talk about some small snippet of history of Rotary, so people would hear it over and over and over again. And I think that has been. You still do that, correct? Yeah. It really makes a big difference in terms of not only learning about the organization, but understanding what is important about the organization and why we all belong, what the purpose is. It's really great. I went to
we had a Twin Cities Rotary International meeting when I went. It was in Copenhagen, Denmark, and Malmo, Sweden. And I think it was but the first time that two cities from different countries had hosted the Rotary International meeting. And it was very interesting the way in which they did it. You had to go across a bridge to do some things, and most of it was in Copenhagen, but some of it was in Malmo, Sweden. And it was a very interesting way in which to host a meeting.
It seems very metaphorical, having to cross the bridge and then get to the other side.
Yeah.
This might be kind of a softball, but I think it's something I've been thinking about as a Rotarian and as a citizen. You know, I feel like this is a time in our nation's history where a lot of folks, where our politics are turning inward, where we're maybe focused a little more at home. We don't want to focus internationally as much. You know, you hear we have our own problems to solve. I'm just wondering if you can make that case or talk about why is it so important to be global citizens and engage? Why is that important?
Well, I really feel that Rotary, being an international group, and it truly is, has a...
Hold that thought. I'm sorry. I just want to let... Thanks, Jim.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Jim. Have a good weekend.
No, you're fine.
You got big shoes to fill there, Joe.
That's right.
That's right. What's
Joe's
literally in-
what
That's right.
size are they?
Okay, one more.
Yeah, these
Yeah.
are big shoes.
Yes.
We're about 10 and a half.
You meant metaphorically. I thought you were talking about big feet,
Thanks,
Jack.
everyone, for doing this. Appreciate it.
You bet.
All right, take care. Have a good weekend.
I'm going to get out here and we'll get the door.
Yeah, I'm following Barb Randall.
That's right.
So,
I'm sorry. Yeah.
you know, I'm going to need a couple
still
of
have
phone.
big shoes to
That's
fill.
right.
By the way,
we
that
need some
was
phone
a
books.
really timely and nice article about Barb in the Gazette.
Yes, it
board
was.
Page.
Yep.
And, you know, that's quite an
a big
accomplished
deal.
young lady.
Yes, it is.
And quite a tenacious young lady to stick with that.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, the thing that I noticed in traveling around in different countries, at one time we were with Governor Ray and his wife in France in doing economical development. We started the Committee of 100. And so we were in Arcachon, the wine country. And we went to a very, very small area that was a little farm area of grape growers. So you would think, you know, a little farm group. And the four of us went in as guests, and we were just traveling around the country there, and we were pretty casually dressed like this. And it was a noon luncheon, and we walked in, and all of the members are in tuxedos at noon in this little farm community. And we were welcomed with open arms, and they were so interested in the fact that we were from the United States, and they had all sorts of questions about different parts of the United States and that kind of thing. And then it came up at the end, and their big project was the Polio Plus.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And here we are, we're out in the middle, literally of nowhere. I mean, the village probably was a village of 500 people, maybe 1,000, but it was very small. And here we were, Polio Plus. And that was an international thing that Rotary literally conquered polio. I think I read someplace, it's come up a little since then, but 1 year, not too long ago, there were 8 cases of polio reported in the world. Now, due to the fact that people are choosing not to be vaccinated against some of these things, it's gone up a little. But I mean, I just think that is a true sign of how international our Rotary group is, and how important being international is. You can't just look inwardly.
Yeah.
And, you know, Lee made the point, and it's so true. We take for granted all the things that you just walk up someplace to a fountain and turn the water on and take a drink and walk away, or you do all these things. You go down into Central or South America or Mexico, and I spent 12 years in Central and South America. And out in most little villages in those days, you didn't have any of these kinds of things. And we don't realize just how fortunate we are to have all these choices. Maybe we're a little too fortunate for our own good. I'm not sure.
Sure.
Adam, I think it's service over politics.
Absolutely.
I would agree.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point.
I would agree.
You had a wrinkle getting the thing through customs, but it had nothing to do with the club. But I think when you look at the commonality of what happened here,
Yeah.
it's service.
I think that's a great point. And Bob, thank you for bringing up Polio Plus. I think that's just one of the great accomplishments of public health, of humanity. I mean, and I know our club does anybody have the number? I know we've raised a lot of money for the Polio Plus campaign over the years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not more. I mean,
We raised a lot of money for that, for Paul Phelan.
Paul Phelan, yeah.
Paul-
He just beat it into us.
Paul was physically a very large person. And I always was sort of wondering whether I ought to say no to him, and I never took the chance.
don't want to take the risk.
No, he was just so dedicated to
Yep.
that. He really was. Just really was.
I'm wondering about advice. You know, again, as kind of a larger club, we kind of have a leadership position on some of these things. I'm wondering, maybe Joe or anybody that's worked on this, what kind of advice do you have for maybe a smaller club or other organizations that want to try getting involved or want to engage internationally? What is just kind of some advice or thoughts you have about that?
I think really picking the brains of other clubs,
Okay.
if you can, at a national meeting or a statewide meeting. We used to have statewide meetings with presidents and, just learning what other clubs are doing.
Yeah.
International projects are not easy, but they are wonderfully satisfying. And you don't have to spend huge amounts of money. You can do water projects, for example, for relatively small amounts of money.
Okay.
And they make all the difference in the world to the people for whom you are digging wells. They don't have to haul water for a mile away, and they don't have to ration it. I mean, water is one of the best projects that you could probably do, and one of the easiest.
Okay.
But there are other things that can be done too. I mean, there are all kinds of projects that are done all over the world by Rotary clubs, and the best way to do that is just talk to other clubs and see what they're doing.
I've had that experience too, where people have reached out and they say, "Wow, you're doing a project again this year. Would you be willing to literally share the work product?" And the answer is, of course.
Yeah.
And even though the project may be different, they just need to see the structure and how it's done, and the funding sources and how to get the word out and all that kind. I mean, there's no secret to it, and part of it is that in that spirit of the common good and service over not only self but politics, as Jack said. That we share information. I mean, it's just kind of like the scientific community, only it's the Rotary community.
Love that. Any other thoughts on how to kind of get engaged or?
Well, I think Lee brought up a terrific point. 1 year I was president of our Chamber of Commerce, and Larry Waller and I went to our national, and we sat down with this young man from Florida that Larry knew, and he was telling us about their business PM program. And he was describing, I said, boy, that's a terrific idea. And so we started talking, and I said, we ought to do that, Larry. And this friend of Larry said, well, we built the whole thing. He said, I'll tell you what. He said, I'll mail you. He said, you use the name. He letterheads, the whole thing with this business PM. And we came back, and within a week or two, we had it all put together because this fellow suggested it, and it ended up, we did that for years and years. And it was a great program, but it was just one of these groups that you go to and share information. And he had no proprietary problems at all. He was in Tampa, I believe. And, he said, hey, I'll just send you all the materials and everything in those days of how to set it up and how we did it. And, you can probably not always tell people exactly what they need to know to do a successful project, but just as importantly, you can probably tell them what not to do to avoid a lot of problems. And a lot of times that's just as important.
That's a great point, Bob. I'd love to just kind of wrap it up. Joe, I don't want to put you on the spot, but as president-elect, is there anything that you're looking at or that your kind of picture or kind of touches your heart of like, boy, I'd love to get involved with that, or what's out there?
Well, have been having a few things cooking.
Okay, I don't want to,
So, and I certainly don't want to steal anybody's thunder too. But I actually am really looking forward to going to the International Convention in 3 weeks and doing exactly what we've all been talking about: is seeing and talking to people all over the world, and finding out best practices or innovative things that we could do and I could bring back and share. And so it really is that international community and international spirit that I'm looking forward to.
Love that.
And you'll learn. You will. I'll tell you, it's overwhelming. It is
Really?
huge. You cannot take it all in. So have a great time.
Thanks. I look forward to it.
I think that's a great place to wrap. I just, Jack, Joe, Lee, Bob, thank you so much for just talking about your experiences and sharing with us. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah, thank you, Adam.
I hope our Rotary Club continues
Yeah, absolutely.
to do that.
Good. Perfect. Is there anything I want to always say before we kind of wrap up? Is there anything anybody wants to talk about that we didn't talk about, or any topic on your mind that you?
Well, yes.
Okay, please.
We had a very awkward experience, and we were on a bus, and riding, I don't know, it was to an event.
Jack, can we get you on mic, or do you not want to talk about this on?
I can do it on mic.
Okay, I just want to make sure if you're.
No, we were riding on a bus, and there was a woman sitting across the aisle from Nance and me of Asian descent. And we were she was from California, and very accomplished person. And that night, we were going to a home, I think it was, of a Rotarian. Anyway, what I'm getting to was she wasn't invited.
Okay.
And for those of you that know my wife, she did not deal with that well because she was discriminated against.
Right.
Now, this was, 40 years ago, but that has changed.
Okay.
So I am so proud that you're doing one of these on women in Rotary because Sam Wallace was my predecessor, and we decided that we were going to push this. And we pushed it, and we took it to a vote, and the vote was close. You were there.
It was just about 49.9 to 50.1.
Wow, something like that.
Yeah, but I don't know if that was
To
the
allow
exact
women
number.
in?
To allow
Yeah.
women
Yeah.
in. To allow, it was,
There were
I mean,
a
it was
lot
like 60-40. But
Yeah, but there were a lot of mature members that really were not in favor of it.
Yeah, so a number of us went on a recruiting spree, and we said, boy, if we're going to have women, we're going to have the best.
Yeah.
And we got the best. And the cream rose to the top because look at all the people that have been. But there literally were tables that women
Would not allow women to sit there.
wouldn't, they'd fill it up. And I'm sorry that seat's taken or something. You're just going to go, wow, that's hard. No, that's water way over the dam.
That is.
But that's something I'm particularly proud of our club.
Because it was one of the first.
It was one of the first. It was one of the first.
I think
and it was
it-
it was a very sad night that night on the bus because this woman, and she basically was uninvited to go to this event because of her gender, and that was kind of a shock.
That's hard to believe right now. I mean, when you really stop and think about our society, everything else is going on. But, that's 50% of your brain power of your nation, of your city.
Oh, it's way more
of
than
your
that.
state. But, yeah, well, you're right.
Exactly.
You're right, yeah.
Bob's a graduate of Iowa State University, and when I was on the Regents, I had the good fortune of sitting with the dean of the veterinary school for lunch one day.
Yeah.
And his name was John Thompson, so
Oh,
we're just
God.
talking. And he's got big, gnarly hands. He was practicing. And I said, John, I said, how's the class look? Oh, it looks really good. You know, it's incredibly competitive to get in. I said, really? I said, well, what's the mix? And he goes, well, it's about 65, 35, 70, 30. And I went, wow, that's a lot of men. And he looked at me and he went, no.
A lot of women.
And I said, well, why is that? And he looked me right in the eye and he says, they're smarter. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
In Iowa State, he told me they generate 20% of the large animal vets in the country.
Really? Oh.
So when you think about that and you think about this 5'2" woman, you know, going through medical school, figuring out how to deliver a calf, said they just figure it out, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's
No, I think it's, you know, we were preparing, we've been doing our prep work for the Women in Rotary episode that we're going to be recording next week, and I found an old Rotarian, there was like an archived Rotarian feature on the RI site about, that they ran when the Supreme Court decision happened. And they anonymously interviewed male members, obviously members from around the country, and I thought it was enlightening. It was blew my mind as a younger member, right? It just seems like a different world. But they had quotes from anonymous men saying, "Well, now I'm going to have to find something else to do. Now I'm going to have to go. Well, there goes the world."
Before they let
believe it.
women in, we had our own votes.
We don't need this.
I have to confess, I've been pretty biased my entire life. I grew up with 4 older sisters, no brothers, 2 daughters, a wife, and a female dog. And in my entire life, I learned very early women are much, much more competent than men, particularly in the teenage years.
Yeah.
You know, teenage boys we're really not very smart.
No.
And girls seem to be at about age 12. They get to be pretty intelligent pretty
Yeah.
quickly and pretty capable.
Well, I can tell you, my son is 1 year old, and watching my wife go through everything that we went through, I do never question her strength or women's
God,
strength
no.
after that. So, anyways, thanks for
that
talking.
too. Yeah, absolutely. Boy,
Absolutely.
you never feel more helpless in your life.
Yeah, that's a great one.
So, thank you for organizing.
Thank
Hey,
you, Adam.
thank you for being a
Wonderful
part of this.
job.
No,
It's
it
been
was
enjoyable.
Great conversation. So
Thank
thank
you.
you so much for
How about
coming up.
next Friday? I think I could come over here on Friday.
Yeah.
Hang out for a while, Jack. We don't
We can do it. We can do it.
So that's our podcast episode for today. We hope you enjoyed this look at Rotary International's global presence and how downtown Rotarians are making a difference across the world. A big thanks to Jack Evans, Lee Clancey, Bob Kazimour, and Joe Lock for sharing their insights, and to Informatics for recording and producing this series. Learn more about our club at rotaryclubofcedarrapids.org or visit us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube by searching for Cedar Rapids Downtown Rotary. I'd like to wrap up with a quote. You make a living by what you get. You make a life by what you give. Thanks for listening.